Are you wondering what happened to Ender? And will he be able to break the enchantment? In this second part of the story, we will finally find out what happened. And if you haven't heard part 1 yet, you'll find a link in the description. My name is Jess, and this is the Yes Tale Story Channel. I'm here to tell you stories from all over the world, some famous, some forgotten. And when the story finishes, the sound of the fire keeps playing, helping you fall into a soothing sleep. If you want to fall asleep to more interesting stories, make sure you like and subscribe. But for now, make sure you're warm and snug. Clear your mind from any worries. Take a deep breath. Let's begin. The air blew keenly on Ender's face, and he did not know where he was. At last he saw a faint grey light, and soon this light grew broader and brighter, and as the shadows fled before it, he could hardly believe his eyes when he found himself in his curraghs on the lake, with the moonlight streaming down from the mountain tops. For a moment he thought he must have been dreaming, but there in the boat was the crystal helmet, and the water dress, and the gleaming spear, and the golden bowl of perfumed water that was to remove the spell of enchantment from the white swan of the lake. And sailing towards him from the sedgy bank was the snow-white swan. And when she touched the boat, Ender put his hands out and lifted her in. And then he poured the perfumed water from the golden bowl over her plumage. And suddenly, Princess Maeve, in all her maiden beauty, stood before him. "Take your oar, Ender," she said, "and row to the southern bank." Ender seized his oar, and the curragh sped across the water, swifter than a swallow in its flight. When the boat touched the shore, Ender jumped out and lifted the princess onto the bank. "Send your boat adrift, Ender," she said, "but first take out your shining spear. The water dress and the crystal helmet will take care of themselves." Ender took out the spear and then pushed the boat from the bank. It sped towards the hut in the middle of the lake, but before it had reached halfway, 6 nymphs appeared from the water and seized the helmet and dress and sank with them beneath the tide. And the boat went on until it pushed its prow against the steps of the hut, where it remained. Then Ender and the princess turned towards the south, and it was not long until they came to a deep forest that was folding up its shadows and spreading out its mossy glades before the glancing footsteps of the morning. They had not gone far through the forest when they heard the music of hounds and the cries of huntsmen, and crashing towards them through the low branches, they saw a fierce wild boar. Enda, gently pushing the princess behind him, levelled his spear, and when the boar came close to him, he drove it into his throat. The brute fell dead at his feet, and the dogs rushing up began to tear it to pieces. The princess fainted at the sight, and while Enda tried to revive her, the king of Erin, followed by his huntsmen, appeared. And when the king saw the princess, he started in amazement as he recognized the features of his beautiful daughter Maeve. At that moment, the princess came to her senses, and her father, lifting her tenderly in his arms, kissed her again and again. "I have mourned you as dead, my darling," he said, "and now you have come back to me more lovely than ever. I would gladly have given up my throne for this. But tell me, who is the champion who has brought you here, and who has killed the wild boar we have hunted so many years in vain?" The princess blushed like a rose as she said, "His name is Enda, father. He's the one that's brought me back to you." Then the king embraced Enda and said, "Forgive me, Enda, for asking any questions about you before you've shared the hospitality of my court. My palace lies beyond the forest, and we shall reach it soon." Then the king ordered his huntsmen to sound the bugle horn, and all his nobles came galloping up in answer to it. And when they saw Princess Maeve, they were so dazzled by her beauty that they barely gave a thought to the death of the wild boar. "It is my daughter Maeve. She has come back to me," said the king. And all the nobles lowered their lances and bowed in homage to the lady. "And there's the champion who has brought her home," said the king, pointing to Enda. The nobles looked at Enda and bowed courteously, but in their hearts they were jealous of the champion, for they could see that he was already becoming the king's favourite. Then the pages arrived, leading milky white steeds with golden bridles, and the king, ordering Enda to mount one of them, lifted Maeve onto his own and mounted behind her. The pages, carrying the boar's head on a hollow shield, preceded by the huntsmen sounding their horns, set out towards the palace, and the royal party followed them. As the procession approached the palace, crowds came rushing out to see the trophies of the chase, and through the snow-white door, the Queen, Maeve's cruel stepmother, attended by her maids of honour and the royal bards, came forth to greet the king. But when she noticed Princess Maeve seated in front of him, who she thought was at the bottom of the lake under a spell of enchantment, she uttered a loud cry and fell senseless to the ground. The king jumped from his horse and, rushing to the queen, lifted her up and carried her in his arms to her apartments, for he had no suspicion of the wickedness of which she was guilty. The court leeches were summoned to attend her, but the queen died that very night, and it was not until a green mound, worthy of a queen of Erin, had been raised over her grave that Princess Maeve told her father of her stepmother's wickedness. And when she told him the whole story of how Enda had broken the spell of enchantment, and of the dangers that he had faced for her sake, the king summoned an assembly of all his nobles, and seated upon his throne, wearing his golden helmet, with the bards on his right-hand side and the druids on his left, and the nobles in ranks before him with gleaming helmets and flashing spears, he told them the story of the princess and of the service which Enda had rendered to her. "And now," said the king, "if the princess is willing to take her saviour as her husband, I am willing that she shall be his bride. And if you, my subjects, bards and druids and nobles and chiefs of Erin, have anything to say against this union, do speak. But first, Maeve," said the king, as he drew the blushing princess to him. "Speak, darling, as becomes the daughter of a king. Speak in the presence of the nobles of Erin, and say if it is your wish to become Enda's bride." The princess threw her arms around her father's neck as she said, "Father, it was Enda that brought me back to you, and before all the princes and nobles of Erin, I am willing to be his bride." Then she buried her head in the king's chest, and as he stroked her silken hair falling to her feet, the bards struck their golden harps. But the sound of the joyous music could hardly drown out the murmurs of the jealous nobles. When the music stopped, the king beckoned Enda to him, and was about to place his hand in Maeve's, when a druid, whose white beard almost touched the ground, and who had been a favourite of the dead stepmother, and hated Maeve for her sake, stepped forward and said, "O King of Erin, never yet has the daughter of a king been freely given in marriage to any man, let alone a battle champion. And that stripling there has never struck his spear against a warrior's shield." A murmur of approval rose from the jealous princes, and Congal, the bravest of them all, stepped out from the ranks and said, "The druid speaks the truth, O king. That stripling has never faced a battle champion yet, and speaking for all the nobles of your land, I challenge him to fight any one of us. And as he is young and unused to arms, we are willing to let him fight the youngest and least experienced among us." When Congal had spoken, the nobles, in approval of his words, struck their shields with their swords, and the brazen sound ascended to the skies. The face of the princess, which a moment before had blushed like a rose, became as white as a lily. But the colour returned to her cheeks when she heard Enda's voice ringing loud and clear. "It is true, my king," he said, "that I have never used my spear in battle yet. The Prince Congal has challenged me to meet the youngest and least experienced of the chiefs of Erin. I have risked my life already for your daughter's sake, and I would face death 1,000 times for the chance of winning her for my bride. But I would scorn to claim her hand if I did not dare meet the boldest battle champion of the nobles of Erin. So here before you, O King, and bards, druids, and nobles, and chiefs of Erin, here, in the presence of the Lady Maeve, I challenge the boldest of them all. The king's eyes flashed with joy as he listened to the brave words of Enda. "Very well," said the king. "The contest shall take place tomorrow on the lawn outside our palace gates. But before our assembly dissolves, I call on you, nobles and chiefs of Erin, to name your boldest champion." Loud cries of "Congal, Congal" answered the king's speech. "Are you willing, Congal?" asked the king. "I am willing, O king," answered Congal. "Very well," said the king. "We shall all meet again tonight in our banquet hall." And then the king, with Princess Maeve on his arm, attended by his bards and druids, entered the palace, and the chiefs and nobles went on their way. At the feast that night, the princess sat beside the king, and Enda beside the princess, and the bards and druids, nobles and chiefs took their places in due order. The bards sang songs of love and battle, and never had merrier hours been spent than those that passed that night in the banquet hall. When the feast was over, Enda retired to his apartment to spend the night dreaming of Princess Maeve, and Congal went to his quarters, but not to sleep or dream. For late in the night he had a visit from the druid who provoked the contest, who weaved spells to charm Congal's shield, spear, and helmet, to make them invulnerable in the battle the next day. But while Enda lay dreaming of Princess Maeve, the small fairy woman, who gave him the water dress, crystal helmet, and the shining spear on the banks of the Boyne, secretly entered his room, and without a sound, she placed a silver helmet and a silver shield on his bed. Then she rubbed the helmet and the shield and the blue blade and shaft of his spear with the juice of the red rowan berries, and let a drop fall on his face and hands. And then she left, as silently as she came. When morning broke, Enda jumped out of his bed, and he could hardly believe his eyes when he saw the silver shield and helmet. At the sight of them, he longed for the hour of battle, and he watched eagerly as the sun climbed higher in the sky. And after hours of suspense, he heard the sound of trumpets and the clanging of hollow shields struck by hard-pointed spears. Putting on the helmet, fastening the shield on his left arm, and taking the spear in his right hand, he bravely walked out to the fight. Around the edge of the lawn, in front of the palace gates, stood all the princes, nobles, and chiefs of Erin. and the palace walls were filled with all the beautiful girls of the court and all the noble ladies of the land. And on his throne, surrounded by his druids and his bards, was the king of Erin, and at his feet sat the lovely Lady Maeve. As Enda stepped out on the lawn, he saw Congal advancing from the ranks of the nobles, and the two champions approached each other until they met right in front of the throne. Then both turned towards the throne and bowed to the king and the Princess Maeve. And then facing each other again, they placed themselves in position. And when their spears were poised, ready for battle, the king gave the signal, which was answered by the clang of stricken shields. And Congal and Enda launched their gleaming spears. They flashed like lightning in the sunlit air, and within a second, Congal's had broken against Enda's shield. But Enda's, piercing Congal's helmet, hurled him senseless on the plain. The nobles and chiefs could hardly believe that their boldest champion had been overthrown in a single second. But when they saw him lying motionless on the grass, 6 warriors advanced to where the chieftain lay and sadly carried him away on their battle shields. And Enda remained victorious on the field. Suddenly, the king's voice rang out, clear as the sound of a trumpet in the still morning. Bards, princes and nobles and chiefs of Erin, Enda has proved himself a battle champion. Who among you now will dare deny him his right to claim my daughter as his bride? No answer came. But when he summoned Enda to his throne and placed the lady's hand in his, a cheer rose from the crowd that proved that jealousy was extinguished in all hearts, and that all believed that Enda was worthy of the winsome bride. And never since that day, although 1,000 years have passed, has the world seen a brighter and happier wedding than the wedding of Enda and the Princess Maeve.